Number 1. I am a 30-year-old female living alone in a small town. I work nights at a local gas station and often walk home after my shift. Sometimes I catch a ride with a coworker, but this night I walked. I don't live far from work, but this particular evening it was pouring the rain, and despite knowing the no riding with a stranger rule, I made a decision I almost didn't live to regret. I had just gotten off work around 11 p.m. when the storm was hitting its peak. The rain was coming down sideways, making it impossible not to get drenched. And to make matters worse, the rain was cold. I had only made it past the parking lot when a car pulled up beside me and a man around my own age rolled down his window and yelled, "Hey, you need a ride? It's awful out here." He was smiling, and the car was nice. Not that it matters, but I have to believe something convinced me to get in. I hesitated for a moment, then, realizing my feet were now soaked, I got in. His car smelled like leather. He was very attractive, and he smiled and asked me what on earth I was doing walking on a night like this. He made me feel comfortable with his concern. I told him I was going home and had just gotten off work and pointed in the direction I had started walking, and he agreed to drop me off. We pulled away from the parking lot area and into the night. My apartment building was only a 5-minute drive away, but it seemed like it took forever. He made small talk on the way, and I started to feel a little less nervous about accepting the ride until we approached my stop. "Hey, right here," I exclaimed. He slowed down the car, but drove right past my building. "Hey, you passed it up. Let me out." I grew anxious as he continued to drive down the street. At first, he didn't say anything. No, "I'm sorry," or "oops." Then he said, "I got distracted. You're just so pretty." I went into immediate shock. He turned the corner and back to the main road. I was losing it inside at this point, but I was too afraid to say or do anything. My mind was racing. I was trying to decide how to get out of this situation, and fast. When we reached the main road, he pulled back down towards where I worked, and I hurriedly said, "You can let me out here." He didn't answer, but he pulled in, and to my relief, he stopped the car. The rain still pouring down. "Sorry about that," he said. I just grabbed the door handle, swung it open, and jumped out. "You forgot your bag," he yelled. I started to keep on going, but remembered my keys and ID were in that bag. I reached back in, and he grabbed my wrist. I looked at him in horror. "I really am sorry if I scared you," he said. I jerked my bag from the seat, and as I was about to turn around and go, I saw a shiny blade sticking out just under his leg. I hurried and shut the door and ran into the store where my friends were working night shift. "What are you doing back?" one of them said. I stood there stunned for a second. I then told them the story of what had just happened. They wanted me to call the police, but I didn't see any point at the time. The guy was creepy, sure, and he had a knife under his leg, but he hadn't done anything to me technically, other than drop me off where I started. I ended up staying at work until one of my friends took a break and dropped me off at home. Was I really ever in danger? Why did he bring me back? Did he change his mind? Was I going to be his first victim and he chickened out? I'll never know. So, weird guy who gave me a ride home in the rain, let's never meet again. Number 2. Alright, so this happened a couple of weeks ago when I was taking the subway back home from work. It was rush hour, so the train was packed with people, all trying to squeeze into the cramped seats and grab onto whatever handholds they could find. I managed to find a spot near one of the doors, holding on to the metal pole as the train rattled along the tracks. That's when I noticed him. A guy standing across from me, staring off into space with this weird glazed look in his eyes. He was dressed all in black with a long trench coat that seemed a bit out of place for the warm weather. At first, I didn't think much of it, assuming he was just lost in thought like the rest of us. But as the train lurched to a stop at the next station, something strange happened. The doors slid open and the guy suddenly snapped out of his trance, darting out onto the platform with an almost frantic urgency. I remember thinking it was odd how he seemed so desperate to get off the train, but I shrugged it off and went back to minding my business. A few stops later, the train pulled into another station, and that's when things took a really bizarre turn. The same guy from earlier came rushing back onto the train, pushing his way through the crowd with a wild look in his eyes. He was muttering something under his breath, his hand clenched into fists at his sides. I remember feeling a twinge of unease as he made his way down the aisle, his gaze darting from person to person as if he were searching for someone. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he stopped, right in front of a woman who was sitting a few seats away from me. I couldn't hear what he was saying to her, but I could see the fear in her eyes as she tried to shrink back into her seat, her hands trembling in her lap. It was like something out of a movie, the way he was looming over her with this intense, almost predatory stare. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to help, but I was frozen in place, my mind racing with 1,000 different scenarios. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, the guy turned and bolted out of the train, disappearing into the crowd on the platform. The whole thing had me shaken and unsettled, like I had just witnessed something I wasn't meant to see. I still think about that woman sometimes, wondering if she was okay and if there was anything I could have done to help. But in the end, all I could do was hope that she made it home safely, and whatever that guy was up to, I hope he never crossed paths with her again. So, weird guy on the train, let's never meet again. Number 3. A few years back, I took up babysitting gigs to earn some extra cash while I was in college. Most of the time, it was pretty straightforward. Watch the kids, make sure they didn't burn the house down, and maybe get some studying done once they were tucked in bed. But there was this one job that still gives me chills whenever I think about it. It was a rainy Friday night, and I was scheduled to babysit for a family I'd never worked for before. The parents seemed nice enough when they dropped off their kids, a boy and a girl, both around elementary school age. But there was something about the dad that set off alarm bells in my head. He had this intense stare, like he was looking right through me, and his smile seemed forced, like he was trying too hard to be friendly. But I brushed it off as nerves and waved goodbye as they drove off into the night, leaving me alone with the kids. The first couple of hours, everything was fine. We played games, watched a movie, and I even managed to get them to bed without too much of a fuss. But as the night wore on and the rain continued to drum against the windows, I started to feel this sense of unease creeping upon me. That's when I heard it. A soft knock on the door, so faint I almost missed it over the sound of the storm outside. I froze in place, my heart pounding in my chest, as I tiptoed over to the door and peered through the peephole. Standing on the other side was a man, a stranger, tall and thin, with a haggard look in his eyes. He was dressed in old, worn-out clothes that were soaked through from the rain, and there was something about the way he stood there, swaying slightly on his feet, that made me nervous. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. I knew I shouldn't open the door for a stranger, especially at this hour, but part of me felt guilty for leaving him out in the cold. I called out through the door, asking him if he needed help or if he was lost, but he didn't respond. Instead, he stood there, staring at me with this blank expression on his face that made my skin crawl. And then, without warning, he reached out and tried to open the door, his hands grasping at the handle with a desperate urgency. I stumbled back in shock and fumbled for my phone, ready to call the police if things took a turn for the worse. But just as suddenly as he had appeared, the man turned and staggered off into the night, disappearing into the darkness like a ghost. I breathed a sigh of relief, my hands still shaking as I locked the door behind him and double-checked that all the windows were secure. The kids were still fast asleep upstairs, oblivious to the danger that had just lurked outside of their front door. I never did find out who that man was or what he wanted, but one thing's for sure, he left me with a feeling of dread that lingered long after the storm had passed. And from that day on, I made sure to trust my instincts and never let my guard down, especially when it came to answering the door to a stranger in the dead of night. So, weird guy standing at my front door, let's never, ever meet again. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and as always, sleep well.